Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Simon Gelsthorpe. Simon, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super excited to talk to you about a framework you've created for coaches called Emotionally Informed Coaching. So really looking forward to digging into that. Before we do, let's do some introductions. Simon, tell us about yourself.
Okay, Dan. Well, by professional background, no, let's not start with professional background. Let's start with the important things. So, husband, stepdad, really importantly recently, became a grandfather for the first time.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Brother, I like playing out. I'm a cross triathlete, so I love playing out on my bike and swimming and running. I used to be a very keen fell runner before that. Just enjoy the freedom of being out and playing. Yeah, and I think fun. So I think fun is really important to me. Other things that give me fun or that give me a lot of pleasure, listening to music. So those are really quite important things for people to know about me, I guess. If you think about professionally, then I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I trained a long time ago. I worked for approximately 4 decades in the health service in the arena of mental health. And, I suppose over that time, it became really clear to me that emotion was a huge importance to people. Why do people come and see a clinical psychologist? It's because they're feeling rubbish and they want to feel different. So emotionality has always been an important aspect of my work. It became more and more important as my career went on in the health service, to the point where I was thinking that maybe clinical psychologists as a whole don't read enough research about emotionality and emotion. Of course, we're very busy looking at research into different types of therapy and different types of problems, because that's our kind of bread and butter. But emotionality began to become much more, and I felt we were perhaps neglecting the whole area, the psychology of emotion that was, all the research being conducted in universities and elsewhere. So that's kind of perhaps trying to explain a little bit about why emotion is on my mind a lot. Also on my mind a lot while I was working was the whole issue of how we as psychologists, and talking about psychology in general now, not just clinical, but how we communicate our knowledge and our expertise to the public. Again, it felt to me like people were constantly asking me, "Oh, you're a clinical psychologist. What does that mean? What do you do? What do you think about such and such?" And I felt that we were really poor at communicating. We're great at writing these massive, long research articles full of our technical jargon, but we are not so great at being able to communicate that in a way to the public that they find easy to understand. So that's always something that has been on my mind. And I don't know if you're aware of the kind of whole media liaison service that the British Psychological Society has. I attached myself to that, and I became the first media liaison officer of the Division of Clinical Psychology. And I'm mentioning this not to kind of blow my own trumpet, just to highlight the fact that, throughout all my career, I've been really interested in trying to make sure that we communicate psychology in a way that's understandable, and that we try and avoid technical jargon as far as possible. And one of the other themes that I suppose went on during my career, and again, particularly towards the latter part of it, while I was working in the NHS, is that we did a lot of work with other disciplines, nurses, physios, occupational therapists, around trying to help them be more psychologically informed. So there was a thing called psychologically informed care that's quite a good buzz phrase for a while, and psychologically informed environments. And we weren't trying to make other disciplines into psychologists, but we were trying to help them be more psychological in the care that they delivered. And that was more or less successful. But again, as time went on, I became aware that actually what I felt was going to be most helpful was if we narrowed the focus of that into it being more around emotion, because that is something that it's universal. Not everybody knows about psychological care, but everybody knows about emotion, because everybody has emotions and feelings. And it felt to me that that was an easier topic to work with other people, because it was something that they already had experience of, and they could know that the people they were working with, whether they were working with them because they were physiotherapists or OTs or nurses, they knew that their clients were also people who experienced emotion, and it would be an important element in the relationship between the two of them and their caregiving. So, as I say, it was something that I was already at the forefront of my mind in terms of work. And as I came to the point where I was leaving the NHS, I was already working on a lot of materials around emotionality. And when I left the NHS, I was thinking to myself, well, what do I want to do now? I knew I didn't want to stop doing stuff around psychology, because I just find it fascinating and really interesting and I enjoy it. But I wanted to do something that I really enjoyed, something that was going to float my boat, so something that was a change as well. I mean, I enjoyed a fantastic career. I mean, I ended up as the head of psychological therapies at Bradford District Care Foundation Trust. We had a team of about 150 psychological therapists working underneath me, and I wouldn't change many things about my career, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something that I knew I would enjoy and that was kind of tied in with what those things that I've already flagged up as things that give me pleasure. So it seemed a bit of a no-brainer in a sense that I would do something around emotion and sport. But I didn't want to be a sport and exercise psychologist, because I'd done my kind of research. I'd looked into the curricula of various sport and exercise psychology courses, and it had dawned on me that a lot of it was not anything that was going to float my boat. There were some huge chunks of it that would be not something I was interested in learning about, and therefore, that was a line that I considered, but I rejected on the basis that what I really wanted to focus on was emotion in sport. And I had already been looking at, for a number of years, the research literature from the sports psychology world, and it felt to me that this was an area that was ripe for development, because I wasn't picking up a lot. I wasn't picking up a lot of research. I managed to get hold of a book called Emotion in Sport. And I was delighted to have found it. I thought, oh, fantastic, I managed to get hold of a copy. Brilliant, brilliant. Started reading it. Super disappointed. Super disappointed, because it just wasn't what it said on the cover. So, emotion in sport. So then I was thinking, well, I'm gonna try and do something to work with athletes, and I'm thinking, how many athletes can I work with, and how am I going to access them, and is that kind of really the best way of doing this? And of course, in the background to all of this, you've got numerous things going on in the world of sport that I was becoming aware of. So there were things like, in cycling, I don't know if you remember Jess Varnish taking British cycling to court, to an employment tribunal, staying with cycling, Shane Sutton getting banned or sacked or whatever. There were things like there was a high jump coach, Foz Khan, who was banned. And more recently, there's been the White Report into gymnastics, the Western Review of swimming, and then very, very recently, Laura Muir's coach, Andy Young, being banned. So, all of these things were going on at the same time as I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I'm thinking, crikey, these are professional coaches working with national governing bodies who are working with elite level athletes. What's going wrong? sure, they're clearly experts in their sport, and yet something is going badly, badly wrong. What is going wrong? And what kept appearing in the media were these very unhappy athletes. And I'm using the word athlete for all sports people. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going wrong for these coaches and their athletes? Because surely, if they just were to ask them how are you feeling, none of this would have happened. So I'm thinking maybe this is where I can do something of value and make a contribution. It reminded me a lot of the stuff we'd been doing up in the health service about psychologically informed care. Maybe we work not necessarily directly with clients, but with other professions. I thought the parallel of that was working with coaches rather than athletes directly. And I'm also thinking, well, I've already got these materials that I've been working on around emotionality that I've used with physios, etc. Maybe there's an easy way of kind of adapting these to work with coaches, and that's how I've pursued it. And that's really what led me into emotionally informed coaching.
So, emotionally informed coaching is a framework you've created based on that biography there, those experiences there, which is absolutely fascinating. And we in sport talk a lot these days, in sports psychology anyway, about psychologically informed environments. We've spoken a lot about pies on the podcast over the last few years.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of colleagues are using that term every day. I use that term every single day in my practice, and I think is interesting, and I really like, because it contrasts how I go about it. Because being a sports psychologist, I would see a pie, a psychologically informed environment, from a multi-dimensional perspective, with multiple sort of approaches, frameworks, tools, techniques, constructs, concepts thrown into the mix there. You're focusing very, very heavily on, or only on, emotion, which I really like.
Yeah.
So, can you speak to that? I mean, whether it's drawing on your past working with clinicians in the NHS, or whether it's now with your athletes and the emergence of emotionally informed coaching, how are you focusing only on emotion? What does this look like at the coalface, and how did this grow?
Okay. Sure. And I'm unapologetic about only focusing on emotion. But as I've said, I believe that emotion is a great place to focus because everybody has them. So now, can I just kind of take a little slight, not a break so much as just by way of explaining things?
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't tell you about myself is that, but I'm going to add it in now, is that I really enjoy words. So words are really, really important to me.
You're a psychologist, of course you enjoy words.
Absolutely, absolutely. What do we do all day? We talk with other people, and we use words to do that. So words are really important. And so I'm just kind of throughout this interview, I'm going to use the words emotion and feelings interchangeably as if they're the same.
Gotcha.
I'm going to use the word athlete to refer to all kinds of sports person.
Do you think they're just to interject?
Yeah.
Do you think they are different, emotions and feelings? Do you perceive them as different? I mean, we had Lisa Feldman Barrett on the podcast.
She's my hero.
Right. Well, there you go. I mean, she would, she uses the circumplex model of emotion, and she would talk about feeling being constantly there and emotions being stronger versions of feelings. But interested to get your viewpoint.
I'm trying to make what I do easily understood by people who are not psychologists. So,
Yes, of course.
and Lisa Fallon Barrett, blimey, I I'd love to meet her. She's my hero. Her book, How Emotions Are Made, it's got to be the best book on emotionality ever. And her work is super informative for me. And I think she's a great communicator too.
So you're in line with emotions are constructed. You're
Yes.
not necessarily
Yeah.
born
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
with.
And
Okay,
that's the
all right.
importance of words, that their words are always our
Yeah,
verbal
tools.
shorthand, but they are the
Yeah.
verbal shorthand to indicate concepts, and emotions are concepts. So I used, yes, so I would say for the general public, emotions and feelings, it's the same thing. If I talk about one, I'm talking about the other. And I will
Okay.
use that throughout. And I
Okay.
do realise that that's not necessarily the case when you're talking to academic psychologists. So, in terms of what emotionally informed coaching looks like, which was your question, it looks like this, I guess. It looks like me working with coaches or athletes and trying to help them understand what emotions are for to begin with. Okay, so it's very much starts off with what I guess is an educational process of helping people understand that emotions are part of the way the brain helps us survive and part of the way the brain helps us decide what to do next. Okay. And I think this is, although I see you nodding and understanding that, I'm not sure that the general public really do understand this because, again, just if you look at education, we don't we don't teach people very much about emotionality through their schooling or university or you go on training or workplace training. It's never going to be a session on emotionality, I'm afraid. So I feel like we're kind of having to play catch up with people a lot of the time because it's something missing from formal education. But this is how it works. Your brain's constantly collecting information, gathering data. And although we tend to, and I'm saying using the word we here to be people in general, not psychologists, but while we assume perhaps that our feelings are reactions to something that's happened in the past, their real value to us is that they are there to help us know what to do next in the future. And therefore, they are all positive. So this is another kind of word issue. I try and encourage people not to think of feelings as being divided into positive and negative, because if they're all meant to be helpful, then we could say they're all positive. I prefer, what my invitation to people is, look, why don't you think of them as being comfortable, uncomfortable? There's some that you're comfortable to experience, some that you find uncomfortable, and everyone's different in that. So it's a lot of taking people through this kind of thing. It's through helping people understand that you get the most out of your emotions if you are a bit like these high definition televisions that people now have. The more pixels you've got, or digital cameras, the more detail you can provide in your television picture or your digital camera, the clearer the picture is. Emotions are like that. And the way we do that is to have as many words as possible to describe our feelings. So the more emotionally precise you can be, that's going to be, it's going to make it much easier for you to channel your feelings, to direct your feelings into constructive action. By the way, I was reading your book, Mental Toughness for Soccer. And I really liked how you use that word direct. I've stolen that from you. I'm borrowing that. Chapter 6, page 71. But I like what I'm trying to do with people always is encourage people to see feelings as something that they can channel, use, direct. And I try and steer clear of, usually, the words control and manage. Because those two in particular, particularly this idea of controlling your feelings, I think sets up expectations that you probably can't meet. I'm not sure we can really control our feelings. And the other thing I do is I offer people a model of how we experience feelings, which is again very, very basic, straightforward. most of our experience of feelings is made up of the physical stuff that's going on, heart racing, sweating, that kind of stuff. What's going on in our heads, so that's thoughts, ideas, perhaps mental pictures. And the third element, obviously, our behaviour, what we find ourselves doing. We'll do a few exercises with people which try and help them see that those are all things which combine. You can talk about them separately, but they combine to make up our overall experience of emotion and feelings. And they're not always really easily controlled at all or managed.
Can I pause you there? Because I think that's a really interesting place for me to interject, because I take quite a nuanced viewpoint that aligns quite strongly, but not completely, with what you say, but very strongly, in as much as I talk to clients about you actually can't control your feelings. Your feelings happen to you. You don't do them on purpose. And I think that is quite a powerful position for athletes to come from. I wish I had known this while I was a pro golfer, because you constantly feel guilty about the feelings that you have.
No,
At least I
but you're
did. I
right.
can't speak for everybody,
You're right, Dan.
obviously, but
And
I
people have
found this in
feelings
my...
about their feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm not controlling my feelings. Well, of course you're not controlling your feelings. They're not controllable.
No, and I suppose where I would personally, and this is where every psychologist would slightly differ in their approach, and I think that's the beauty of the profession, and probably any profession, is that there are different approaches. Is that I would still use the term control, but from the perspective of I can with skills choose to take control of the response to my feelings.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a slightly nuanced way to use the word control. I would still put that word up in neon lights. And again, it's not, I want to emphasize that the joy of this is every psych is going to use, just like every coach is going to have a slight spin and a different take on things. You can take control of your response to your feelings. And to speak to your point, by directing my attention, by using granularity of language, those kind of things. So I think there's a lot of cohesion between how we would approach this and see this.
Absolutely. So that granularity, I think that's Lisa Feldman Barrett's word, isn't it? She's brilliant. It harks back to the more of analog photography days.
And she definitely hasn't copyrighted that word either, so we can use it.
So it's that's, I guess that's what it looks like to begin with. That and of course, what I try and do is incorporate a massive amount of discussion around this. Try and get a sense of individuals' own vocabulary, emotional vocabulary, etc. I do some work on within that normally incorporates or includes trying to distinguish whether particular words are feelings or not. I'm quite a pedant on this. So, for example, I would say, let's say somebody says, I get people to make a list, just jot down as many emotion words as you can think of, and including any swearing if you want to. But we're not going to mention that bit now. And inevitably somebody will come up with something like trapped. I feel trapped. To which I will say, I'm going to put that one in the not a feeling column. Because it's describing a situation or a circumstance, but it's not how you feel about that. Okay, so you might actually be trapped, and you might be feeling worried, or you might be trapped and feeling angry, or heaven knows, you might be trapped and feeling quite happy about it. So I try and make that distinction for people, just to clarify what are feelings and how they link and how we might be able to kind of clump some together. I'm not a great one for this idea, that's been around in the psychology research on emotion about, basic feelings, the 5 basic feelings, 127 basic feelings. But I do find it helpful when I'm working with people to think of 5 kind of categories and then kind of explore how we might lump them together. So, for example, if people mention grief and say, I don't know, loneliness, I might point out that we could think of those as both being specific types of sadness. Grief, the sadness you feel when someone's died, or
So sadness is one category. What are
yeah.
the other 4?
Well, I'd go with the classic happy,
Mm-hmm.
frightened, sad,
Mm-hmm.
angry, disgusted. But
Gotcha.
I'm not kind of rigid on that. I think there's plenty of scope for individual opinion on this.
But when I think of athlete behaviour, thinking about this from a sporting perspective, I'm assuming then that when you think of happy, we can think of I feel various sort of feelings, and come back at me if you don't think what I'm about to say is feelings. I feel free. I feel upbeat. I feel positive. Do all those kind of feelings come under happy, or am I broadening this out too much or missing the point?
Well, free, upbeat. What was the other one you said?
Well,
Positive.
positive,
Yeah.
confident, even, because I'm just noting there's 4. I know you don't like to use negative or positive, but there's 4 here that would, I suppose, in personality science literature, would be considered to be negative, and the happy is positive. So you've got approach behaviour and
Yeah.
avoidant behaviour. So there's a lot of avoidant and one approach here, which is scary in and of itself, right? Because lots of our feelings are more oriented that way, perhaps. So, do all the what might personality scientists say are positive emotions, again, appreciating you don't use that term, coming under happy? Does that have a broad range of experiences and behaviours that sports people engage with when they're competing? I am positive. I am confident. I am free. I am.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yes.
I'm proud.
Yep.
I think I don't think we talk enough about pride. So yeah. I mean, I'm happy to accept all of those. I am happy to accept. So free. I mean, free. I would maybe say that's something slightly, but I'm happy to be free.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. Free is more a metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, though. I mean, and isn't it interesting that of all of those 5 categories, only one is, the kind of positive, comfortable,
Comfortable, as you'd say. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
category. And I think, of course, the problems around feel emotions in sport tend to revolve around all those uncomfortable ones.
Yeah.
Most notably, I guess, fear, anxiety, worry. That's all the same, and maybe anger. But
Yep.
it's I think as you say in your book, anger can be very motivating, very positive, very constructive if you're able to direct it, channel it, harness it in a way that's positive and constructive.
And on that, these being constructive, I would say that sadness. I mean, there's a very small tinge of utilizing sadness to drive one's training or performance or whatever, utilizing sadness. But by and
Well,
large, it's the one of those 5 that you'd say has no, especially in the heat of battle, has no real functionality.
oh, now you see, I disagree with you strongly there, Dan, because I think in sport. I mean, I know we're talking about sadness, but reframe it as disappointment.
I suppose again, context matters here. It depends on what sport. But what I've tended to find in my career is that If you are experiencing despondency and you don't deal with that despondency quickly, especially in a sport like, let's say, football, soccer, where the game is going on around you, and I'm talking about on the pitch here. So on the
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about because this is what I want to do with people. You see, is help them understand that these feelings, even though they are uncomfortable, and even though they're kind of intuitively, we think, well, how can feeling sad possibly be useful to me? So I am keen to try and help coaches and athletes understand in a very real world context. So let's kind of come up with one. So you're saying something like you talk about, let's say, something on a football pitch, for
Yep.
example. Yeah. Okay. So let's try and think of a situation. So let's say you're a player. What about this? You are an attacker. You've got an open goal and you miss it. It would be quite appropriate to feel disappointed and sad, guilty, ashamed, even. It might be a complex mix of feelings because you know yourself, I should have scored and I have blown it. Right. What I'm saying is embrace that feeling, embrace all those feelings. Don't try and control them, don't try and suppress them. They are completely appropriate. Question is, how do you channel those? How do you channel those feelings? How do you harness those feelings during that match? How do you direct them to make a wise, constructive, positive choice? And what I would say is this: all those feelings that are uncomfortable, part of their value is that they are uncomfortable and we want to escape them. It's horrible to feel guilty, ashamed, disappointed that you've just missed a goal. Of course it is. And you don't want to feel like that. But that's the value. The value of this is that it's so uncomfortable. You don't want to feel that. Next time that happens, you do not want to feel that. Harness it. Embrace it. Don't dwell on it. You don't have to dwell on it. But do not try necessarily to just get rid of it, because actually it will drive you to better playing. You don't want to feel that because it's horrible. If you diminish it, then it's less horrible. It's less motivating. But if your reaction is, I missed it, damn, I really don't want to feel like this again in 2 minutes' time. The next time an opportunity to score comes up, I really want to bang it into the back of the net properly. And that's what I'm going to do, because I'm going to use this feeling to drive me and to motivate myself to do that. Is that does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
It's easy. It's miles easier to say it than to do it, of course.
Oh, difference between simple and easy. I don't think what you're saying is any different to what I'm saying in terms of, and again, there's probably a slight gap between the way we're explaining it. I don't want an athlete to be immersed in sadness for 5 or 10 minutes, because in my belief is that they are dead. What I want them to be able to do is whether it's to use it, to lose it, to engage with it briefly, in order to utilize it for the next 5 or 10 minutes worth of actions and behaviors. I think we're saying exactly the same thing in many respects, just coming at it from a slightly different explanatory point. Look, I completely agree. The skill in all of it, for me, in my opinion, in my experience, is the capacity, in many respects, I suppose, to put it succinctly, and probably in too simplistic a heuristic, but let's go with it, to use it or lose it.
Okay.
Ignore it, to use it towards your behaviors and actions, or to just, it's there, it's inside of me. but I'm going to lose it because I've got to get on with the next action.
And this touches on what we said quite early on in the session, which was that there's this issue of it's not just the feeling so much, it's how we feel about it or how we use it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm conscious of in terms of looking at the research that's done on emotion in sport is that is not something that anybody measures. And it's something that one of your guests touched on recently. So, you had on Johan Forsberg.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. And his counterintuitive results about how those hockey players that he was researching on, how their feelings before the game didn't seem to have any impact on their performance. Yeah, and everyone was thinking, oh, well, that's a bit weird. That's not what we kind of think of. And he made the point he and his colleagues made the point that, and I'll just give you this quote. It's the last sentence of the research article. I went to read the research article. Fascinating. The mechanisms that enable elite athletes to perform despite experiencing negative psychological states. That's an extract from the last sentence of that paper. And it's what we don't measure. It's what we don't have any measures about that at the moment. We can't kind of assess that. And yet it's key. It's key between the difference between, if you're feeling despondent on the football field and your head drops and it's all gone to pot, I can't do anything, versus if feeling despondent on the football field and you think, to use your phrase, use it or lose it, I'm going to make a difference. Those two players are feeling the same thing. If we measured their level of sadness, it would be the same, but their reaction to it, their harnessing of it, completely different. And that's what at the moment our research fails, I think, unless you tell me otherwise, fails to tap into. And this is what I think would be really fascinating to know about. What is it? What are those mechanisms? What are the difference? We can measure, if we could measure sadness in the middle of a football match, those two players might score the same, but their reaction to it completely different, and that would make a massive difference to how they direct that sadness and how it, either became a handicap or a positive thing for them. And that's what I'm trying to help people master.
No, I love it, Simon. I love everything you've said there, and certainly measurement. This is psychology, isn't it? And measurement is always a challenge. And I don't know if there's anything out there that meets your concerns. What I do know, I mean, definitely in the area, and we've spoken about this quite a bit on the Sports Social Show, in the area of resilience, the demonstration of resilient behaviours. So observing from a behavioural perspective, which gives some indication, doesn't it? Perhaps not the whole piece, but some indication.
Yes, I mean, and funny you should mention that, because he had a fascinating guy on recently, Alan McKay, who'd done that research into mental toughness behaviours from a very behavioural perspective. And again, I listened to that, and I went away and read the article that he and his colleagues had written, and I found it really frustrating. I'm not kind of knocking the research, because I can see why they chose to work just on mental toughness behaviours, but it seemed to me that it was a great opportunity to talk about emotion in sport. And I read that article and I was thinking, when's the emotion bit going to come? And it just wasn't there. I'd love to get in touch with Alan and have a discussion with him about an emotional element that could be added to that mental toughness work that he's done.
Well, there's another episode as well, which would be remiss of me not to mention, episode 297 with Ben Ashdown and Dr. Mustafa Sarkar. And but to speak to your point, I do wonder sometimes if it's because in sport we live in a world of actions, we live in a world of behaviour. Often researchers are looking for really useful ways to help coaches help athletes and behavioural behavioural techniques and
yeah.
action-oriented
And I
interventions.
think this comes back to what we were saying earlier about emotion just not being something that people are educated in, taught about. I think a lot of people are not comfortable talking about their feelings. And the coaches I've worked with have all told me essentially that really there's nothing in their coach training which is about how how to have a conversation with an athlete about how that athlete's feeling. Particularly scary, I think, is to have a conversation with an athlete about how that athlete's feeling about you as a coach and your coaching. So a lot of the work that I do is aimed at trying to help people feel more comfortable having emotional conversations and to feel better equipped, just with the vocabulary to do that.
I think meeting what you're saying there and drawing upon some of the experiences in modern day sport, you mentioned some earlier, and I won't mention names because some of those incidents and cases I don't know much about, but I know that over the last decade or so, there's been challenges for coaches to be able to learn how to stretch players, people,
Mm.
towards gold medals, towards championship winning performances, times, um, whilst also staying within ethical boundaries, whilst creating a psychologically
Yeah,
informed
yeah.
environment, what I would call a safe and healthy environment. And sports psychology, I personally think, certainly in the UK, has done a lot of great work here, especially in Olympic sports, medals and more. So there's a lot
Mm,
of
mm.
work around welfare and mental health
Yeah,
and
yeah.
well-being for athletes. So I think we are doing a really, really good job in many respects. But in terms of, when you reflect on some of those case studies that have come into the news and coaches have been sacked or chastised or disciplined as a consequence of their behavior, I think a lot of it comes from they want to stretch
Mm,
their
mm.
athletes. They don't know how to necessarily do it in an ethical way, and so they've emotionally disturbed their athletes. A very simple, broad brush statement there. How do coaches stretch athletes whilst also helping them take control of uncomfortable emotions?
Okay, well, I flagged up early on that I'm a bit of a pedant on the word front, Dan. So, how about this? Coaches should not be stretching their athletes. Coaches should be encouraging and facilitating athletes to stretch themselves.
Yep.
And I think I'm splitting hairs, I know, but I'm making the point that I think sometimes we what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm going to say misunderstand. That might not be the best word, but it's something. What I'm talking about is the role of coaches, and this is partly informed by my previous work as a psychological therapist. Okay, psychological therapists don't make people better; they help them make themselves better.
Agreed.
Coaches don't make better athletes. Coaches help athletes make themselves better.
I look. I wonder if it's either
Yeah,
or and also, but carry on. I'm meeting your
yeah,
point here.
okay.
I get it. I get
So
it.
it's a collaborative relationship. Yeah, right.
Agreed.
And as part of that collaboration, what is surely you have to ask how you both, or think about, or have a discussion of how you're both feeling about that relationship. If part of what I would like to see just built into everyday coaching is some kind of feedback from athletes about how they feel about today's coaching session. I mean, it's very difficult if you're working with like a massive squad. You'd have to do it. You'd also Do we have to farm it out to somebody slightly separate? But what if? Wouldn't it be great if, athletes had the opportunity to reflect on how they feel about, today's session? It, some of the sports that I've worked with are sports where, there's a massive dropout. Swimming, for example, we're working with young people, and they're doing bonkers amount of training, really big loads of training, and yet, do we ever ask them, well, do you think that's useful? How do you find that? Or even, a simple basic question: how do you feel about your performance in training? And training is far more, in lots of ways, training is far more important. How you feel in training is far more important than how you feel in competition, because it's so much more of your time, and also it's, if you're not happy in training, you're perhaps not going to carry on in the sport. And for most sports, the amount of time we spend training vastly exceeds the amount of time we spend competing. But again, I'm kind of going off track a little bit here. But what I think it comes back to is there's another issue here about how do you measure good coaching? As a coach, how do you know if you're doing a good job? Because I don't think it can be as simple as medals. There are certain things that are easy to measure, and unfortunately, they're not always the best things to measure. So, for example, you could measure how many gold medals have your athletes won. You could measure how fast is your athlete, how heavy is your athlete. These are things that are very easy to measure, but which have led people into some real bother. And the things that I would consider to be useful to measure and important to measure are really difficult. How do you feel as an athlete about today's training session? How do you feel as an athlete about the forthcoming competition? Much harder to measure, but much more important to my way of thinking, and much more useful in terms of ensuring that the coach and athlete relationship is in good nick.
I think so. As you're speaking, you're making me think of the importance, and again, we speak a lot about this on the sports side, the importance of the system. That
Oh yeah,
actually,
oh yeah.
the system matters, and the system matters. When I talk about medals, I'm speaking about the elite adult level, and you're going to have a system there.
Mm.
British swimming is going to have a system where they have a vision and a plan and a set of values and so on and so forth. And they're going to be objectives for coaches. And often that's where you can align the experience of emotion from athletes through to coach, through to the system, because the system in place, and I know this is where, again, coming back to a lot of great work has been done by sports psychs, aligned with coaches, aligned with leaders within governing bodies, is that the governing bodies have started to be more nuanced around their
Yeah.
objective setting, because they know that's going to impact the experience of the coach, the emotional experience of coaches and subsequent athletes. And one more thing to say here, obviously, again, what is great coaching? Well, it just depends on the context. Coming back to, say, I don't know, it's a random thought, swimming. British swimming at the Olympic level is going to have different objectives to a bunch of 8-year-olds in your
Of
local
course.
swimming pool, and the coaching there. But the system still matters. If you've got 1 or 2 8-year-olds who show promise, and the socio-historical context of swimming is you get up at 5, and Adam Peaty, the great British breaststroke swimmer, has questioned the value of this. But the socio-historical context has been 8-year-olds get up at 5 in the morning and do X amount of laps at 6 in the morning till 8 in the morning before going to school. We've got to constantly ask questions about that form of engagement and whether that correlates with eventual success at Olympic level, and the efficacy of that and the ethics of that. So yeah, it's quite broad and quite interesting. interesting, but ultimately the system and the
Absolutely.
socio-historical context within that system is really interesting with relation to the experience of emotion by all key stakeholders.
Yeah. And Andy Kirkland's work on that stuff. Have you read?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Andy's been on
Andy's
twice.
been on, hasn't he? Yeah, fantastic stuff. And I see I had an interesting conversation with Andy a couple of weeks ago, and I see myself and Andy as being very concerned with the same stuff, and kind of approaching it from different ends of the spectrum. So, and Andy's very concerned with that, all that stuff, like you say, exactly, socio-cultural stuff, the system, the governing body's role in that, etc. Fantastic work, and I love it. I love his style of writing. It really, I'm so pleased to have discovered his work. But I'm kind of at the other end, I think, of the spectrum of kind of sphere of influence. So my focus was always, well, what can make a difference? What can I do that might make a difference here? So I'm thinking very much about working with athletes and working with coaches. And as you said right at the beginning, I'm very narrowly focused here. But I'm very narrowly focused because what I want people to understand is that this is quite straightforward. This is something that I'm not asking them to change their whole coaching techniques. I'm asking them to add in this one, basically, fairly everyday tool. And the tool is consider emotion. And what I try and do is equip coaches and athletes with up-to-date knowledge based on psychological research, some skills around vocabulary, words, helping people find, as we all do, our particular way of talking about this in a way that we are comfortable with. And it's that comfort. What I want to be able to say at the end of the day is that I've helped some athletes and some coaches feel more comfortable about incorporating an emotional discussion with one another into part of their overall sport experience, regardless of what sport it is. That's what I want. If I can, at the end of the day, say, "Yeah, I know this coach now feels quite happy asking an athlete, how are you feeling about this program?" Because inevitably, what happens is, and again, this is based on working with some coaches, they will meticulously design a training program for an athlete, and they won't stick to it. And how do you, as a coach, then broach that topic of conversation in a way that doesn't alienate your athlete, or which isn't just you being annoyed with them for not sticking to the program that you've taken a great deal of care in devising for them? And I think it's been really helpful. It's been really helpful for those coaches. It's enabled them to feel a lot more at ease at having what previously might have felt like a difficult and uncomfortable conversation to have. So if I can do that, then all well and good. But it's not a massive thing, and I'm not asking people to, completely change how they design their programs or the techniques they use. But I'm asking them to consider how easy it could be, because they're coaches are human beings. They have feelings. They've got their own emotions as part of their everyday life. And it's building on that. It's not something that's completely new. It's building on existing strengths.
With all that in mind, as we come to a close, what therefore are three, doesn't have to be three, but three takeaways for coaches, drawn from emotionally informed coaching, your framework? What are three takeaways that coaches can utilize moving forward to help them manage emotion for themselves or their athletes. Use emotion, I should say, more than manage, to use your term. Apologies. Harness, direct.
Harness, channel, direct. Yeah. Okay. So I guess the main one has to be, remember that all feelings, no matter how uncomfortable we find them, are there to be helpful insofar as they are there to help us decide what to do next. It's that kind of positive helpfulness that's future oriented. And I think that's a key one. I think another takeaway might be, and again, this relates back to what we said earlier on, not be too hung up about controlling, and I'm making those inverted comma gestures. Don't be too hung up about controlling them, because they're not easily or ever controllable sometimes. And a third one, it's that precision thing, I guess. Try and be a bit try and be as precise as you can be when using words to describe your feelings, and see if you can get as big an emotional vocabulary as possible. Yeah, so that's 3, isn't it? Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think 3 great pieces of advice. Simon, brilliant. Thank you for that. That's
Oh, thanks for having me on, Dan. I've really enjoyed our chat.
I have too, and I know that you will have tapped the interest of everybody listening in. So, for those who are interested in your work in emotionally informed coaching, how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in contact?
Okay, they will find a little bio of me on the University of Bradford website, where I've got my honorary position. They'll find me on LinkedIn. They'll find me on Facebook. Oh, that's mostly stuff around me fell running, triathloning, and being a granddad. Plus, recommendations of music that nobody's ever heard of, that nobody wants to listen to. But,
So basically, through LinkedIn would be a great way to link in with you.
LinkedIn be fine, yeah. But you can email me at s.gelsthorpe@bradford.ac.uk.
Simon, thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Dan, for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode, and I hope you did too. I'd love to hear what you think of the Sports Social Show, and if you do have any suggestions, please do get in touch via X or through Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.